Today, I'm diving into the unsettling reality that death often lingers in the spaces we least expect, haunting those who come face to face with its presence. I'll share the chilling experiences of people who encountered this eerie phenomenon in small-town hospitals, where the line between life and death fades away, leaving a profound impact on those who were there to witness these moments. If these true tales resonate with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to share with fellow horror fans and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories of the real and the unexplained. Your support keeps these chilling narratives alive. The clock showed 2:34 a.m. when I felt the room shift. I was in St. Luke's, an old hospital in New Orleans, recovering from a minor surgery. The patient in the bed beside me, a woman in her 30s who had been quietly murmuring to herself for hours, suddenly fell silent. The quiet settled heavily, only broken by the distant sounds of the city night. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Maybe she'd finally drifted off. But a few minutes later, a nurse arrived and stood by her bed, her face hidden in the shadows. After a long moment, she gently pulled the sheet over the woman's face. My stomach dropped. She glanced my way before leaving, but didn't say a word. Now it was just me, alone, lying there with the dead woman only a few feet away. Every creak in the old walls felt amplified, and the humid Louisiana night made it hard to breathe. Shadows flickered from passing cars outside, casting ghostly shapes across the room. I kept my eyes closed tight, pretending to be asleep, hoping morning would come soon. But each passing second stretched into hours, and with every rustle or shift in the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow still there with me. A chill snaked down my spine, despite the stifling heat of the room. The air seemed to thicken, a palpable weight pressing down on my chest. I imagined her still form beneath the sheet, her presence lingering like a faint perfume in the stale hospital air. Was it grief? Or was it something more? The rhythmic whoosh of the ventilation system, a constant companion in the sterile environment, suddenly shifted, a jarring change in pitch that made my heart leap. My eyes snapped open, darting towards the woman's bed. Nothing. Just the sheet, draped smooth over the form, the faint silhouette hinting at the emptiness beneath. Yet I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement, a subtle shift in the fabric. Panic began to claw at my throat. I tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as the product of a weak, sleep-deprived mind. But the irrationality of the situation, the stark reality of my isolation in the middle of the night, amidst the sterile silence and shadowed corners of a hospital with a history that whispered of untold suffering, was overwhelming. I tried to recall the woman's murmurs, attempting to piece together what she might have been saying. Nothing clear came to mind, just disjointed fragments. A name, maybe? A plea? It felt like a vital clue, a fragile thread leading me to an unknown destination. The clock ticked on, each second an eternity. The shadows danced, growing longer, more sinister with each passing moment. I could feel my own heartbeat thrumming in my ears, a frantic rhythm against the unnerving silence of the room. I dared to reach for my phone, the pale light of the screen a beacon in the gloom. But as I fumbled for it, a new sound pierced the quiet. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like a sigh, coming from the direction of the silent woman. My breath hitched in my throat. I froze, every muscle tense, every nerve on high alert. The sound was gone as quickly as it had come, but the chilling echo remained, a ghostly whisper in the heavy air. My heart pounded like a drum solo in my chest. I was trapped in a silent battle with my own fears, the unknown, and the lingering presence beside me. I was no longer just a patient, recovering from a minor procedure. I was a spectator, an unwilling participant in a drama that was unfolding in the heart of the old hospital, a drama that hinted at a world beyond my comprehension. The hours crawled by, each one more agonizing than the last. The city outside continued its muted symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic, but within the walls of St. Luke's, a different kind of story was being told. I started to notice things. Small details that were previously lost in the haze of my post-operative haze. The faint scent of lilies, a fragrance I hadn't noticed before, lingered in the air, a sweet and cloying perfume that seemed to emanate from the bed beside mine. Sometimes, I felt a faint pressure on the edge of my bed, a weight that seemed to shift and settle as if a hand were resting there. My rational mind fought against the rising tide of fear. This was New Orleans, a city steeped in folklore, where the veil between worlds was said to be thin. This was St. Luke's, a hospital with its own dark history, whispered about in hushed tones by those who knew its secrets. Could it be? Was the woman's death just the beginning of something more? Days bled into nights, and the fear morphed into a pervasive unease. I longed for the comforting presence of the nurses, the routine bustle of the hospital, anything to break the suffocating solitude. But the hospital seemed to have fallen silent around me. The nurses, usually so attentive, were scarce. Their visits were brief, their interactions distant, as if they too were aware of something ominous lurking in the shadows. Desperate for a connection, I started to talk to the woman, even though I knew she couldn't respond. I shared my thoughts, my fears, my memories, as if she were a confidant, a silent listener in a world where I felt utterly alone. "Who are you?" I whispered one night, my voice trembling in the stillness. "What happened to you? Why are you still here?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, yet I felt a shift in the room, a subtle change in the atmosphere. The faint scent of lilies intensified, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a sensation of icy touch on my cheek. Was it my imagination? Or was it a response? In the days that followed, I started to see things. Shadows that moved just out of the corner of my eye, whispers that seemed to carry the woman's voice, a melody that echoed in the empty corridors. I began to realize that she wasn't just a presence, a ghost trapped in the hospital walls. She was trying to communicate, to tell me something. Driven by an unexplainable curiosity, and a desperate need to understand, I delved into the hospital's history. I discovered the stories, the hushed whispers of patients and staff who claimed to have encountered the supernatural within the old walls. I learned of a tragic event, a flood that swept through the hospital decades ago, leaving a trail of death and sorrow in its wake. The stories mentioned a young woman, tragically lost during the flood. Her name, whispered in the darkest corners of the hospital, was Clara. Clara. The name echoed in my mind, a connection to the woman in the bed beside me. Could it be her? Could she be Clara, trapped in the hospital, unable to find peace? Driven by a mixture of fear and fascination, I continued my investigation. I found old newspaper clippings, dusty files, and faded photographs in the forgotten parts of the hospital library. The pieces of the puzzle slowly started to fall into place. Clara, a young mother with a bright spirit, had been a patient in St. Luke's during the flood. She had been separated from her child during the chaos and drowned in the rising waters. Her body was never found. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The woman beside me, the one who had whispered and sighed, who was still somehow present despite her death, was Clara. The fear I had felt was replaced by a strange wave of empathy. She wasn't a menace or a specter. She was a lost soul, tethered to this place, unable to move on due to her traumatic death and the anguish of losing her child. Slowly, tentatively, I started to communicate with her again. I spoke to her of the outside world, of the sun and the stars, the sounds of nature, the warmth of human connection. I told her stories of my own life, and I spoke of her child, hoping to evoke a flicker of recognition, a hint of peace in her tormented spirit. The response was subtle, at first, a change in the air, a shift in the shadows. But over time, it became clearer, a gentle presence, a sense of understanding. I spent my remaining days in St. Luke's talking to Clara, soothing her restless spirit. I became her voice, her connection to the world she had lost. I worked to find peace for her, to help her find closure and release her from her earthly bonds. The day I was finally discharged, I felt a sense of peace, a calmness I hadn't known before. I knew that Clara was still there, somewhere in the shadows of St. Luke's, but her presence was no longer a haunting terror. It was a gentle whisper, a reminder of the lives lost and the enduring power of human connection, even in the face of death and beyond. I never forgot my experience in St. Luke's. It was a reminder that some stories are not confined to the pages of books or the realm of folklore. Sometimes, the most chilling tales are the ones that unfold in the quiet corners of the world, in the shadows of forgotten hospitals, where the line between life and death becomes blurred, and the echoes of the past refuse to fade. I carried Clara's story with me, a constant reminder of the fragile nature of life and the profound impact we have on each other, even after we are gone. Working as a nurse on the night shift at Chicago Mercy, I'd seen my share of unsettling moments, but nothing like that night. Around midnight, the woman in the bed beside my patient, a veteran in his 30s, passed away quietly. The doctor came and confirmed her death, and soon after, a team arrived to move the body. But the thing that stuck with me was the veteran's face as he looked at the empty bed, almost like he could see something I couldn't. His name was Daniel, a young man with haunted eyes that hinted at a life lived under duress. He'd been admitted a week prior with a severe concussion and lingering nightmares, a silent casualty of a war that wouldn't let him go. The woman next to him, Eleanor, had been a cheerful presence in the otherwise sterile environment, always ready with a kind word and a warm smile. Her passing, though expected given her condition, cast a palpable shadow over the ward. Daniel's reaction was what truly unsettled me. He watched the removal team, his expression unreadable. When they were gone, he simply stared at the empty space where Eleanor had been, a strange tranquility settling over his features. It was as if he was looking at something beyond the visible, a whisper of her presence still lingering in the air. I felt a shiver, a sense of something unseen, something otherworldly. When I returned to the ward later, after completing my rounds, the room was plunged in near darkness. The only light came from the faint, flickering glow of the hallway lights, casting long, wavering shadows. A sense of unease crept over me, amplified by the silence that seemed to press upon my ears. I settled into my chair, a worn leather piece I'd claimed as my own during countless sleepless nights. The usual symphony of the hospital, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, the muffled voices from down the hall, was strangely muted. Then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible dragging sound. My heart skipped a beat. It was a subtle noise, like a fabric being slowly pulled across the floor, yet distinctly audible in the dead quiet. My hand instinctively reached for the call button, my breath catching in my throat. Should I investigate? Was it just a loose floorboard, or something more sinister? I rose from my chair, a surge of adrenaline pushing back the fear. I crept out into the hallway, my footsteps echoing with an unnatural loudness. The halls were utterly silent, save for the occasional, distant beep from a monitor. Nothing. No dragging sound, no movement. Just the lingering scent of antiseptic and the oppressive silence. Relieved, but still unsettled, I returned to my chair. And that's when I saw him, Daniel, staring. He wasn't looking at the empty bed this time. He was staring directly at my chair, his gaze fixed on the empty space where I had been sitting just moments before. It was as if he saw someone there, someone invisible to me. A cold dread washed over me, chilling me to the bone. His eyes were wide, filled with a strange mixture of fear and understanding. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a chilling realization. The feeling that I wasn't alone in the room was no longer a mere unease, but a palpable presence. It was as if Eleanor, in her passing, had left behind a faint echo, a whisper of her existence, and Daniel was the only one who could perceive it. The night stretched on, an agonizing blend of apprehension and fascination. I tried to rationalize it, to explain away the inexplicable. Perhaps the medication, the trauma, was affecting Daniel's perception. Perhaps it was just my own imagination, fueled by fatigue and the strange events of the night. But the unsettling sight of Daniel's vacant stare, the faint dragging sound, the chilling emptiness of the room, it all conspired to create a terrifying tapestry of the unseen. Dawn arrived, slow and reluctant, as if afraid to break the eerie spell enveloping the ward. The morning staff came, buzzing with their usual routine, oblivious to the strange occurrences of the night. But Daniel remained silent, his once haunted eyes now glazed over, a veil of sadness falling over his features. He didn't respond to their inquiries, didn't engage in conversation, simply stared into the void, as if still caught in the grip of the night's events. The morning doctor, Dr. Evans, a seasoned professional who had seen his share of human suffering, was baffled. He ran tests, consulted with specialists, but found no physical explanation for Daniel's sudden silence. He chalked it up to shock, trauma, the lingering effects of his injuries. But I knew better. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel remained unresponsive. He ate when offered, he slept when tired, but he never spoke, never smiled, never reacted to anything. He was a living statue, trapped in a private world of whispers and shadows, a world I suspected only he could see. The incident haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something extraordinary, something beyond the realm of my medical knowledge. Did Daniel see Eleanor? Was she truly still there, lingering in the space she had occupied, unable to fully transition to the other side? I tried to discuss it with my colleagues, but they dismissed it as my overactive imagination, a result of working too many night shifts. I even consulted with a few psychologists, hoping they could offer some insight into Daniel's state, but they were just as baffled as Dr. Evans. The experience chipped away at my confidence, planting seeds of doubt about the very nature of reality. I began to question what I knew, what I believed. Was there truly a veil between the living and the dead, a thin membrane that occasionally tore, allowing glimpses into a world beyond our comprehension? Over the years, I've encountered countless patients, endured countless unsettling moments, but none have ever had the same chilling impact as that night at Chicago Mercy. I often wonder about Daniel, about whether he ever regained his voice, his connection to the world. And most of all, I wonder if he ever saw her again, the woman in the empty bed, the woman whose presence lingered even after her departure. Did she find peace? Did he find solace in the knowledge that she was still with him, in his own particular way? The questions remain, like whispers in the quiet corners of my mind, a constant reminder that there are things in this world, and perhaps beyond it, that we cannot fully comprehend, things that defy logic and reason. And sometimes, the most unsettling moments are the ones that linger, the ones that leave us forever questioning the very nature of reality. Hospitals in small towns like Helena can feel unnervingly quiet at night, and Mountain View General was no exception. It was a low, sprawling building with faded paint and windows that seemed to stare out blankly into the Montana night. I was there overnight for observation, a precautionary measure after a nasty fall during a backcountry hike. Sharing a room with me was a man in his 30s, his face pale and drawn, in and out of consciousness. He'd been brought in earlier that evening, the EMTs whispering about a possible head injury. The air in the room was stale, a mixture of antiseptic and faint, unidentifiable odors. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor beside his bed was the only sound besides my own shallow breaths. I tried to read, the pages of a worn paperback blurring before my eyes, but the flickering fluorescent lights and the man's labored breathing made concentration impossible. Around 3 a.m., the beeping stopped. It was a sudden, stark silence that pierced the quiet of the night. I looked over, my heart jolting in my chest. The man's chest was still, his face slack and devoid of the strained expression it had held earlier. A nurse, a woman with kind eyes and a perpetually tired look, appeared moments later. She was calm, almost detached, as she checked his pulse, then covered him with a crisp white sheet. "He's gone," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper above the hum of the hospital. She called for help to move him, her words echoing strangely in the silent room. The staff moved efficiently, their movements hushed and somber. Soon, the bed was empty, the heart monitor silent, and a strange void filled the space where he had lain. An uneasy silence descended upon the room. I tried to go back to sleep, but the events of the past few minutes had shattered any semblance of peace. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt an intense urge to look at the bed, a compulsion I couldn't explain. It was as if something was there, lying in wait, hidden beneath the sterile white sheets. A storm was rolling in, the first whispers of wind rattling the windows, bringing with it a sudden drop in temperature. The room felt colder, the air thick with anticipation. Each time I heard a creak from the old building, a groan of the wooden frame, or the wind rattling the glass, my imagination conjured images of him still there, reaching out from beneath the covers, a ghost lingering in the space he had occupied moments before. Fear, cold and sharp, began to seep into my bones. I pulled the thin hospital blanket tighter around me, trying to ward off the inexplicable chill that gripped me. The small town hospital, usually comforting in its promise of safety, now felt like a haunted house, the silence a deafening roar. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the feeling, to dismiss it as mere exhaustion and the lingering shock of witnessing a death. But the feeling persisted, a growing unease that clawed at the edges of my reason. I kept expecting to see a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow that wasn't quite right. The hours crawled by, each minute a struggle against the insidious fear that had taken root. I tried to focus on anything else, the rhythmic patter of the rain against the window panes, the distant hum of the hospital's generators, the faint, rhythmic beeping of another patient's heart monitor down the hall. But my mind kept returning to the empty bed. Dawn finally arrived, a pale sliver of light peeking through the grimy window pane. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a damp, still air. I was exhausted, my body aching from the night's turmoil, but my mind was still racing. The feeling of dread had lessened, replaced by a lingering sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone in that room after all. The next few days were a blur of medical tests and follow-up appointments. I tried to put the events of that night out of my mind, but the memory of the empty bed and the growing sense of dread lingered. I struggled to sleep, haunted by the image of the man's still face, the silence that had followed his death, and the chilling sensation that something else had been in the room with me. I started researching, driven by a need to understand what I had experienced. I learned about the concept of lingering energy, the idea that the emotions and experiences of a person can linger in a space even after they are gone. I read stories of others who had felt a similar presence after a death, a sense of something unseen and unfelt yet intensely real. The more I read, the more I realized that my experience wasn't unique. It was a common phenomenon, though rarely spoken about openly. Perhaps it was the quiet of the small-town hospital, the stillness of the night, that had amplified the experience, making it more intense. Perhaps it was the suddenness of the man's death, the abrupt transition from life to death, that had left a lingering echo. I started to accept that I might never fully understand what I had experienced in that hospital room. But I also realized that it had changed me. It had made me more aware of the ephemeral nature of life, the fragility of the human body, and the possibility that there are things beyond our comprehension. I continued to visit Helena occasionally, drawn by the rugged beauty of the landscape and the quiet rhythm of small-town life. Every time I drove past Mountain View General, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a reminder of the night I shared a room with a dying man and glimpsed a sliver of something beyond the realm of the physical. The memory of that night continued to shape my perception of the world. I became more sensitive to the subtle energies around me, more attuned to the fleeting moments of life and death. I learned to appreciate the silence, the quiet moments that often hold the most profound truths, and I carried with me a quiet respect for the unknown, the unseen forces that shape our lives and the world around us. The hospital, with its faded paint and quiet halls, remained a reminder of that night. It was a reminder that even in the most ordinary of places, in the quiet spaces between life and death, there are mysteries that we may never fully unravel. The small-town hospital, with its stark white walls and sterile corridors, became a symbol of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the human spirit. It became a place where the boundaries between the living and the departed blurred, where the echoes of the past lingered in the silence, a reminder that some things are beyond our understanding, yet are woven into the fabric of our existence. The silence of Mountain View General, once a source of unease, became a source of contemplation. It was a reminder that life is a fleeting thing, a precious gift that should be cherished and honored. It was a reminder that even in the face of death, there is a strange beauty, a sense of wonder that lingers, a quiet echo of a life lived, a story whispered in the stillness of the night. The experience at Mountain View General became a defining moment in my life, a turning point that shifted my perspective on the world. I learned to live with a quiet curiosity about the unknown, a sense of wonder that permeated my everyday existence. And though I may never fully comprehend the nature of the presence I felt that night, I carry the memory with me, a reminder of the beauty and mystery that lies just beyond the veil of our understanding, a whisper from the other side, a silent testament to the enduring power of life and death.